Welcome to this Introduction to Continual Improvement. This is an equivalent of yellow belt type of training in the Six Sigma rubric, and it's a program that is specifically designed for business leaders or people who will be taking decision rights about how to do continual improvement projects in the organization. There'll be a series of 8 different videos here that provide the background necessary to get engaged in this process of structured decision making that we introduced in the orientation or the awareness program that was the 4 videos that preceded this. If you haven't seen those videos yet, I would encourage you to take a look at them as we're going to be building upon that basis. In this first lecture, we're going to talk about this program for business leaders from the perspective of why executives need to be engaged in it. So let's begin by asking the question, why are you here? Why do you care about this? Is it because you're trying to satisfy some mandated requirement that the executive team said you need to learn about this? Are you trying to achieve some sort of certification that says that you've got this qualification and therefore that's important and somehow in your career? Is it just to satisfy your boss because they said you really have to learn about this? Or do you want to learn how to improve better? To make better choices about improvements that will actually greatly increase the capability and enhance the performance of your organization. My hope is it's this last motivation that's bringing you to engage in this video series. Now, there are 4 focus areas we're going to talk about in this first thing. So there are behavioral areas that deal with executive behaviors. So first we want to discover the role of business leaders and how to attract their attention for thinking about quality and how not to do that. Second, we're going to learn about decision-making constraints of the executive function and how you can contribute to improved capability in your leadership team. Third, we'll talk about how to apply mentoring, facilitating, and coaching skills to guide the executives using a structured process to self-discover their quality needs. And finally, we'll talk about how to become a trusted advisor of business leaders. Now, these will be applicable either to those people who are working for you, if you are indeed the senior leader of your organization, or to perhaps how you work with your peers, if you're a member of the executive team, or if you're an advisor to the executive team, helping to coach them on how to make strategic continual improvement, breakthrough, or the idea of transformation types of projects. So let's begin with the first topic. So we're going to talk about requirements of a superior business leader, the key focus areas for leading organizations to perform according to their customers. So first, I want to talk about the perspective of Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric for 20 years. Many people have considered him to be the leading executive of the last century. And what Welch said is the most critical obligation of the executive function is to deliver profit in the short term and strength in the long term. So strength does not come by short-term profits only. Short-term profits are how we live. It's how it's reported in the Wall Street stock exchange. It's how it's reported in terms of corporate financial performance. It's about market share and these sorts of decisions, but it is not what gives you long-term strength. So we have to be able to deliver both of those. That's the obligation of the executive function. Now, one of the first books about the executive function was written by Chester Bernard. And he talked about the art of executive decision-making in his 1938 book, The Functions of the Executive. This book was ranked by business school professors as the #2 most important book in the last 100 years relating to management philosophy. The first was Frederick Taylor's Principles of Scientific Management, and the second was The Functions of the Executive by Chester Bernard. So his ideas have had very deep impact on many people subsequently. What Bernard said was the fine art of executive decision consists in not deciding questions that are not now pertinent, in not deciding prematurely, in not making decisions that cannot be made effectively, and in not making decisions that others should make. So it's not about doing things that are superfluous. It's not about doing things too early. It's about using the information and guiding the organization forward in the right way. Now, we've talked about this idea of the Gemba, the three distinct levels of an organization. The operational level, where we have work processes, Gemba 1, continual improvement. Gemba 2 is the system level, the business systems, and that is where we do breakthrough types of projects. And Gemba 3 is the governance level of the organization, which is where transformation occurs. And the idea of a continuous state of structural change to our processes, to our organizations, to our product lines, to our markets. This is what happens when we coordinate and bring together all of these change actions in an organization. And each level is making its own distinct contribution to production of systematic activities that result in quality outcomes, and that is performance for the better and avoiding disasters and bad situations. Now, the first person to write about this as a formal art was actually Henri Fayol, who wrote General and Industrial Management in 1916. He was a French mining executive, and in his book, he was trying to describe his own personal philosophy about how to do the executive function. And he said that managing requires a constant search for improvements that can be introduced into every sphere of activity. So in other words, at each level in the organization, that there has to be a search for what can be done. What are the ideas that are worth bringing forward? And he said the search for improvements should be pursued unceasingly. In other words, never stop looking at all levels, operational, administrative, or business level, and the governance level, and throughout all parts of the organization, in every function, in every region, and in every type of discipline. The executive in charge, the CEO, should have an active, unrelenting intent to effect improvement. So this is the challenge that the senior management team has. How will we make improvement and drive improvement everywhere in the organization? So when we look at this, we see that we need to be able to put together a structure, a strategy management process that builds the operational capability in that front line in the work processes, that creates a business capability that provides us with agility and the ability to have dynamic capability development as the situations change, and a guiding purpose or the objective that we are striving to achieve as a common vision. And that's what is about the transformation of the organization. Who do we want to become and how will we get there? And in this model, we see that Gemba 1 is the operational function. This is daily management. We have processes that we operate and we have improvements we make to those processes. The executive team monitors that performance in a strategy monitor. They assess that performance at the business level to see how well are we doing over time. And then they start searching for strategies that will allow them to better fulfill the purpose of the organization, which is the strategic intent that is inherent in the organization's vision for where it wants to be. Its purpose, its critical assumptions about the business, and what it's going to do over the long term to get there and stay at a leadership level in its given competitive environment. The strategy search is looking for opportunities for improvement. What can we do? And then we assess from those opportunities, what are the threats and vulnerabilities we have as an organization relative to competition? And then we formulate the strategy. The strategy formulation is choosing those strategic change projects that operate either at the work process level, the business level, or organizational transformation level that drive strategic change to achieve the vision we'd like to have for this holistic organization. Now, that's the first topic. The second topic is talk about span of control. If the job of the executive team is to evaluate these things, make these decisions, formulate the strategy, choose the projects and the direction to implement strategic intent that comes from the governance of the organization, then what is limiting their ability to make the decisions? And so the limitations are called, as we'll see, bounded rationality. We have limits on the choices we can make about decisions. Now, this term was created by Herbert Simon, who won the Nobel Prize in economics. He was considered to be the first person to create something called behavioral economics. And his book, Administrative Behavior, in 1947, was a critical text, because what it did was it identified the role of the psychological function of the executive, how they make decisions, how they guide organizations, how they work with people. Again, his work was strongly influenced by the work of Chester Bernard, as well as Mary Parker Follett, a psychologist who worked in management in the 1900s, the early 1900s. And what he talked about, he said, bounded rationality is the premise that it states that all decisions are constrained, all executive decisions are constrained by three limits on the quality of that decision. So one constraint is the integrity of the information. Do they have good information to support the decision? If they have bad facts, they'll make bad decisions. Second is the competence of the decision maker. Can the decision maker interpret and understand the facts that they are presented? So the decision maker needs to be able to not only read, but also interpret and understand, perceive, and then apply those facts in a way that makes decisions better. Now, they don't have to do that all by themselves. They can have trusted advisors that can help them. And third is the degree of urgency with which the decision must be made. The faster the decision, the less time there is for analysis, the less time there is to gather new data, and we have to make choices based on judgment, based on the capability we have that we bring into play, and our past history. And so the challenges that we have is that we see that organizations are actually hierarchies of decisions. It's a complex network of decision processes. And every decision involves a selection of a goal, where we want to be, and a relevant behavior that's related to that goal. How do we behave to actually get that? What are the actions we take? And so, according to Herbert Simon, all human decisions are based on a model that has three premises. The first is about intelligence activity. And he said problem finding or recognition that this search is conducted by one of three methods. In other words, executives will search for the decision one of three ways. The first way is structured problem solving. This is what we do in Six Sigma with DMAIC. Structured ad hoc in a solution search. This is what we do when we just form teams and we say, well, what do you think? Or structured continuous search. And that's where we have this investigation of strategy and try to understand, how do we establish the strategy for what we're doing? Now, the model we presented in the orientation training, the continuous improvement process model, combines all three. And so what we want to do is think about how will we conduct the intelligence activity of our organization to make us more capable in the future. Second is there is a design activity. We have to develop alternative solutions. They have to be designed. It's not just they pop out of the sky. It's not that they just come out of our minds as fully formed, but we have to design. How should these things work? What will they do in the future? How will they work under certain circumstances? We have to consider the question, what if? What are the alternatives that we need to be concerned about? How will they work together, and what do we do about them? And third is there's a choice activity. Once we have the designs of the alternatives, we have to make some analysis of those alternatives and choose a path forward. And in making that choice, we have to structure the thinking process where we consider both the benefits of the alternative activities, the costs of those alternative activities, as well as the risks associated with each of the alternatives. And we have to think also, what are both the short-term and long-term effects we have in all three of those categories? So, to do this, the job of the executive is to ask questions. And this is something that came across very clearly in all of the work of Peter Drucker. Drucker is known as being the management sage, if you will, of the last 100 years. He wrote 30 books about the topics of management, including the concept of the corporation, the practice of management, and his books on management actually have formulated the foundation of management, modern management theory. And he said the most difficult and important job is never to find the right answers, it's to find the right questions. For there are few things as useless, if not dangerous, as the right answer to the wrong question. Well, then it can't really be the right answer. So if we try to get something right, but we're asking the wrong question, we will be doing the right thing for the wrong reason, and it will not be an effective and efficient decision. So Drucker went on and he said there are some insights into thinking, this mind of this executive. Effective executives do not make a great many decisions. They concentrate on what is important. They try to make the very few important decisions on the highest level of conceptual understanding. They don't worry about the details. That's for the staff to implement. They try to find the constants in the situation. What are those things that are strategic and generic that will carry us forward rather than solving the detailed problems? They are therefore not overly impressed by speed in decision making. Rather, they consider virtuosity in manipulating a great many variables a symptom of sloppy thinking. So if you're just manipulating many things in different ways, it doesn't mean that you have clear thinking. They want to know, what is the decision all about? What are the underlying realities that we have to satisfy? They want impact rather than technique. They want to be sound rather than clever, because they are responsible for strength in the long term. Drucker went on, he said, effective executives know when a decision must be based on principle and when it must be made pragmatically on the merits of the case. They know the trickiest decision is that between the right and the wrong compromise, and they have learned to tell one from the other. They know that the most time-consuming step in the process is not making the decision, but in putting it into effect. Execution is, or implementation, is what makes excellence. And so he says, unless a decision has degenerated into work, it's not a decision. It's at best a good intention. And good intentions do not create future performance. It is only when we translate the decisions into work, into activities, that moves it forward. Many decisions are making decisions by the right people in the right way at the right time. So effective decisions result from a systematic process with clearly defined elements that's handled in a distinct sequence of steps. So Drucker identified this idea of structured decision making as a critical ingredient to success in trying to understand how do we actually make the right decisions and then drive them into existence by the actions we take. And Drucker also said, we now accept the fact that learning is a lifelong process of keeping abreast of change. And the most pressing task is to teach people how to learn. So it's not about teaching you a fact. It's about teaching you the process by which you learn, which you challenge your thinking processes, which you challenge your old ways of doing things and look for new alternatives. So management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. There's nothing so useless as doing something efficiently that should not have been done at all. Drucker also said it's more important to do the right things than it is to do things right. So choosing the proper things is a higher good than following procedures. And he said there's 4 questions that all leaders should ask. And the questions are we doing things right? Are we doing the right things? Are we doing the right things the right way at the right time, the sequencing? And then how do we decide what's right? What is the decision criteria that's going to guide us into this choice so we can understand which way we need to go? Now, following the work of Herbert Simon, Daniel Kahneman came along. He is also a behavioral economics, and he won the Nobel Prize. And his work, Thinking Fast and Slow, provides us another understanding about the difference between intuitive judgment and logical choice. And while Bernard talked about the thinking modes, Simon focused on rational decision-making influenced by emotion. What Kahneman did was he blended these two ideas into a theory about rational and emotional decision-making processes or systems. And he said there's two systems. One is intuitive, that's system one, and it's emotionally based. It's how we just make judgments. And so this is based on emotions. I feel this, and this is what I believe we should do. System two is logical, analytical, rationally based on decisions. I think this, I've calculated this, and I know that this is what we should do. And so he said executive decisions are best made if they're system two rules. In other words, we've figured out the rules to apply in an organization, and then they inform system one executive decisions. Kahneman observed 70% of executive decisions are just based on system one without any system two support. And he says this is what gives us the strength over the long term when we have the right appropriate decisions supported by facts and then blended in with the executive choice from experience to make the judgments and drive the organization in the right way. So how should executives decide? Well, quality, the way I define it, is the persistent pursuit of goodness, trying to get better, trying to get to that higher level of performance. But we have to couple this tightly with the relentless avoidance of badness. That's the risk of things gone wrong, of not achieving our objectives. And so quality is not merely conformance to product requirements. It's not just customer satisfaction. It's not just fitness for purpose of a deliverable. Each of those are important ingredients, but fundamentally, quality must do no harm as it delivers goodness. And that no harm is in multiple dimensions. It's not just to the customer, it's not just to the environment, it's not just to the safety of people in the using community, it's in all dimensions. So the basic principle of a quality decision is, does it meet a criteria of goodness and fail to create badness? Therefore, if a product requirement does harm, then it has inherent badness, and it cannot be considered quality. If one customer is satisfied while another is harmed, then it cannot be considered quality. If the purpose that is fit has bad implications, so you say, yeah, we designed it to do this thing, and it does that, but the implications of that activity is bad, then it cannot be considered quality. So quality must result in goodness while doing no harm. So how do executives decide? So traditional decision logic subjectively chooses options. And so if we take a look at this in terms of a matrix, so difficulty to implement, that's ease of implementation versus speed of implementation. And we see here that there are easier and more difficult processes to make decisions. Fast decisions results in less than a year. Medium results in 2 to 3 years, or slow, over 3 years. And if we take a look at those that are easier, we see many of these are the short-term decisions we see frequently in organizations. Start a sales campaign, change pricing, discontinue products or services, change incentives, reduce budgets, replace management, downsize the organization, close facilities, squeeze suppliers on pricing or discounts, increase or reduce debt. So all of those are things that can be done relatively quickly to change the financial performance of an organization. More difficult in these fast are divesting finished goods inventory if we can't sell it, selling off assets or resources, automating production, inventory liquidation, where we're selling the raw materials or parts, or modifying old products or services. Each of those takes a little longer time. We start seeing medium and slower things. As we start getting up there, we see that they become more strategic as we get to this over the right-hand side. And so what we see is that the easy to make decisions, the things that we can affect for the sense of urgency, are mostly cosmetic. They don't get to changing product lines. They don't get to changing markets. They don't change the brand image of the organization or advance new technologies. They don't change the work culture, or they don't create an innovative business model. All of those things take time. And we have to anticipate the need to do those things before we're faced with the immediate conflict saying those things have to change. The third thing we want to talk about is the role of the quality leader as an expert, a trusted advisor, a mentor, facilitator, and coach, and an influencer without authority. Now, in this situation, we might be talking about the head of operational excellence. We might be talking about a strategic development manager. We might be talking about somebody who is a transformation manager, somebody who's trying to affect the strategic change in that. They don't have to have the label of quality in their job, but what they're trying to do is to improve the quality of the organization, seek goodness without doing harm, avoiding badness. And so what we see is that the mistake is treating everybody in the same way. One size does not fit every organization. I can't just say, this is a role model of that job, this is what I need to have. We need to tailor and customize this. So not all problems are solved in the same way. In a manufacturing environment, we might have many physical, discrete problems. In a social environment, we might have many human types of problems, and they're very different types of situations. If we're talking about a process industry compared to discrete manufacturing, very different approaches are used. And so not all problems need the same requirements for how we manage change in that organization. Also, not all solutions are easily implementable for quick gains. As we saw, some of them may take 3 to 5 years. And not everyone needs to learn the same methods and tools. Those that are appropriate for the discrete manufacturing environment or for a daily management system may not at all be appropriate for the strategic considerations or trying to understand what strategic pathway we need to form for an organization. But we do need to have some sort of consistent approach to deliver standard value in our organization. We have to have some way of integrating, aligning decision processes so the strength of the organization can be developed. And when we take a look at this, there is an executive requirement for quality. Stephen Hawking said, increasing the quality of management information is the right focus. The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. It's the illusion of knowledge. I have facts. Do the facts actually create knowledge? So knowledge is about the ability to project also into the future and create wisdom. So knowledge is understanding the motivations behind what we observe in the real world so we can then apply it in a different way under new circumstances. Now, I did an interview in August of 2001 with Peter Drucker. And I asked him a question. I said, Peter, many times I'm asked as a president, as I was at that time of the American Society for Quality, how can we convince our CEO to do quality? And what he said to me, I still remember the way he said it. He goes, no, that is not your job. Really? Most of the quality officers I had say we have to be the influence on the executive team. What is our job? He says, it's the job of the staff to clearly report necessary information that CEOs can easily assimilate and understand so they may draw their own conclusions. The decision is theirs, it's not yours. It says, these CEOs, they're bright people. They've got lots of experience, more experience than you do, broader experience. They've been chosen for this. They've been delegated those decision rights by the board of directors. They've been carefully screened. What we have to do is give them the situation, give them the knowledge that they need. And so responsible managers based upon reliable measurements. When we see things differently, when we have good measurements, we have the possibility to act more decisively. And that is the obligation that we have to give good measurements to the executive team so they can interpret. So we have to provide them what they need to learn. So the executive's job in structured project management is first, seek to understand the situation in its current state. What's happening today? Learn what the team has discovered about its operation. Consider alternatives that are offered for issue resolution. Then choose the option that is most consistent with business objectives and the resources available to relieve the situation. The team's job is to present data to the executive about their project findings, what they've investigated, what they've learned. So they assure that the data has integrity. It describes the real state of the situation. That they present the data in a form that's easy to understand so the executives can read and interpret it and perceive what they need to know about future choices, and provide decision options that are complete and will fully describe both potential positive and negative outcomes. So, how can the executive initiate waste? Well, Japanese management identifies 3 categories of waste that can occur anywhere in organizations. However, when they appear in senior management, they create a particular problem. So the first is mori. This is irrational waste when decision-making is based on non-logical criteria, or there's a lack of delegation to the most appropriate level. So I'm making decisions that the worker should be making, or I'm making decisions that marketing should be making. And so if I'm making those decisions at the wrong level, we call that micromanagement. So mura is a second kind. This is waste that occurs if work does not flow smoothly, resulting in wasted times and frequent stop-starts of the work activities. And so if I keep delaying things, and I say, oh, let's not do this now, what happens? The whole organization comes to a standstill and doesn't work. Or if I'm going to say, we're going to do a reorganization, we'll get back to you in 2 months. What happens in the organization? Everybody delays work because they don't know where they're going to be in 2 months. And what will happen next is, well, maybe I won't be responsible for this, so maybe I shouldn't do the work now. Or they might then suspect there's going to be a downsizing. Maybe I don't have a job. And what happens when that situation? Your best people start looking for, well, what could I do? Because they know they have other opportunities. Muda is waste in work discipline, as actions create waste that reduce the efficiency, effectiveness, and economic performance of the organization. And what we have seen is that executive mori, irrational decisions. So let's just say I'm going to go through a series of acquisitions, but I've made the choice to keep each one of those acquisitions using the same software systems that they've had in the past. And they're not actually the same system corporate-wide. Then that creates systemic mura, waste in cross-business workflows. If I want to try to move resources from one organization, parts or whatever, people from one organization to, I see that there is no smooth fit in those IT systems. And that generates process muda, or a lack of discipline, and the workers can't correct it. In the worst case, I know there was a bank that was growing by acquisitions. They kept the same IT systems everywhere, and at the end of the month, they had to then, first of all, close each individual bank, then close the branch or the brand of that branch, if you will, and then they had to close the banks within a nation, and then they had to close the banks within a region, and then finally they could get the results for the whole system. And that was almost a full month late after the month had been over. So it's not the 4th working day of the next month, it was close to the 20th working day of the next month. So that means that all decisions you're making in the organization are based on old data. Now, when we coach executives about strategic quality, it's wrong to tell the executive what to do. They need to go on a discovery path in a way that they can accept, so they have a possibility, an opportunity to learn what are the available choices to make in a situation, and that they can make sense out of that situation, both the expected outcomes as well as the potential negative consequences of their decisions. And that requires certain quality leadership skills. So in a study that was done back in Hewlett-Packard in 1987, we see that these skills that are required to be a quality leader are customer orientation, to be an advocate for key customers, to speak for them so you understand what their needs are so well, being politically or organizationally astute so you understand how these organizations work together, that you're influencing of others, not dictatorial, but you're making people so they feel confident in making their own choices. Interpersonally diagnostic so we can read how other people are. Goal-oriented so we can set goals that are, if you will, capable of being achieved realistically by people, and not frustrating them. We're persistent. We don't give up easily. And it's strong planning and organization skills. We're also mentoring others, helping them to become better, collaborative, working together in teams. We initiate projects. We just don't let them, happen to us. And then we are professional in all the work we do. We're also conceptual. We understand the theory behind the actions we're taking. And we are innovative. We're looking for new ways of doing things that will lead us in different pathways than we've gone before. And we're also communicative. We have the ability to talk, discuss, and openly describe what's happening so people can contribute to that. Also, we're self-confident in our ability, and that we wrap all of these capabilities around a confidence in terms of how we execute. Now, one thing a savvy business leader does is that they perform what's called a presidential review. And this is done by the principal executive in charge when there is a problem that's been raised in the organization. And it's an end-to-end assessment of the business at a detailed level, where people come in and typically will go down 2 levels in an organization, and we're going to try to understand what's happening in the organization. Why do we see the outcomes of the organization occurring that are actually happening at that level? And then we track the value-adding flow across the function. So we start at the very beginning and we exercise what's called one-piece flow and see, okay, here's where we make the choice of suppliers. Here's where we get the parts. Here's where we go through all the way to the very beginning. If I'm talking about something like a legal system, maybe here's where the dossier came from or the brief came from. Here's how it took, the pathway it took to get here. Here's the situation, how both parties are dealing with it, and each case as we progress through all the way to the end of the legal decision process. But we follow it as a one-piece flow, and we try to understand what were those situations that occurred along the way that created delays, that created waste in that system, and may have contributed to mori, bad decisions, bad flow, mura, or muda, a lack of discipline in our process. And the review is sequentially following, asking the same questions at each level. You start at the very beginning of the process. What is the input? What is the process we do? What is the output? How do we judge the quality of the input? How do we judge the quality of the output? And then we ask ourselves, what is the waste in the system? What can we do to streamline the flow, improve productivity, or increase profitability, or reduce costs in that system? And then the questions that we ask are these, so where do your inputs come from? Who's giving them to you? How do you judge the quality of the inputs? What do you do to provide value in the throughput? What are the steps in your process? How do you measure the quality of your work processes? How do you measure the quality of your work output? And we do this in front of the whole team so that we can see how does the work at each step in that process integrate with the flow of the whole. And many times what we'll do when we have this type of review is we'll discover there are conflicts in that system where things that are happening do not actually give us the end result we're looking for. And this is the role of the trusted advisor, to be able to facilitate such a meeting for the executive in charge. Now, the whole idea of mentorship came from the Greek mythology or the Odyssey, where mentor was the friend of Homer's hero Odysseus. And he was entrusted with supervising the education of Telemachus, who was Mentor's son, as a protege. And the education is much broader than classroom discussion. It includes deeply seated advice to nurture and develop confidence in the protege. And so desired characteristics are you're insightful, you're courageous, you're loyal, knowledgeable, wise, honest. And these are also quality leadership skills that we've just seen. And so how do we measure up to those expectations? Are we able to be that trusted advisor? Are we accepted because we have actually been successful in the past in these roles? Can we demonstrate that at each step along the way that management has the right decision to place trust in us to guide the organization in an effective manner? And then what are your personal development challenges if you're going to move into this role at the top level of the organization? And this is what a leader in continual improvement really needs to understand. How can I take this role on? What do I need to do to develop these types of communication skills and these types of soft skills that are so essential to making an organization become more flexible in the future? Now, there are two words that are important in this from Japanese. One is jishuken and the other is hansei. And this is because executives must build a working environment that's both collaborative and cooperative. That means we use teams to analyze and define the situation, to identify or specify the alternatives, and present that situation for decision by management. So these teams are called jisuken, and this means a second pair of eyes. And this is referring to the check step in Standardize, Do, Check, Act, or Plan, Do, Check, Act. And this is where, in this step, what we're doing is we'll form committees, councils, project teams tasked with managing information, and we will go back and say, what does another perspective tell us about this situation? What does another perspective tell us about these facts? If I look at them from the eyes of an accountant, I might see one thing. If I look at them from the eyes of human resources, I might see another. If I look at them from the eyes of marketing, I might see another. If I look at them from the eyes of an engineer, I might see another. So how do all of those come together? And the most important activity in this shared process is the opportunity for hansei. Hansei is reflection, and this occurs at each level of the organization. At the operational level, Gemba 1, at the business level, Gemba 2, and also at the governance level, Gemba 3. And at each level, we consider the problem, we define it, analyze it, and we create options for decisions. And this is what executives must manage. This is decision preparation activity. This is how we gather up all of the ideas of the organization so we can fully anticipate where we need to go and what is the risk from each of the choices. So there are some takeaway points. So first, executives have to discover for themselves what's important and make the choice about the direction. And so that is their obligation as a leader. Executives need to be developed in a way that suits their own functional requirements, not in a way that suits the workforce or the direct reports. And this gives them insight into theory and its application to become success. And executives must learn what are their limits and surround themselves with trusted advisors. If I am as an executive and I'm a marketing person, I need to have some engineers, I need to have some lawyers, I need to have some accountants, I need to have people, not just more marketing people. At the end of the day, however, the executive has to decide what, when, and how to execute, because execution is the job of the executive. So thank you very much for being with us in this first module, this introduction to continual improvement and the role of the executive. Hopefully we've given you a lot to think about as you move forward in terms of your own development of a continual improvement program for your organization. Thank you.